Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Muscolino, and I want to welcome everybody to today's session on building an effective compliance culture. During my career working within compliance, I served in a multitude of roles, but part of my position was always enhancing the compliance culture. Doing a gap analysis, finding out what's wrong and where we can make improvements. To me, creating a positive atmosphere as far as your compliance culture serves so many different purposes for an organization. And we're going to discuss a lot of those elements today. So, as far as the agenda for today, we are going to talk about the tick the box mentality. I'm sure you've heard it and probably know what it means, but we're going to go into detail why this is not a very good approach for having a compliance culture, at least in a positive light. We're going to talk doing a compliance needs analysis to determine where the gaps and opportunities are for your compliance culture. Then we're going to talk about developing a plan or program. I'm going to give you some helpful hints, ideas, suggestions based on my experience. Next, we're going to talk about changing your compliance culture. And then we'll jump into understand your target audience, which is a big, big thing anytime you're communicating with almost anyone. You want to make sure that you direct your message appropriately and you craft it with that in mind. Then we're going to talk about retention. Learner retention is a big thing. The more people retain, the better they'll be able to utilize that knowledge on the job and in also real life. And then with any initiative, we always have to measure the effectiveness. The question is, how did we do? And regardless of good or bad, we have to measure it and figure out what we could do better going forward. So going beyond tick the box, one of my biggest pet peeves. And to me, that mentality does not help creating a positive compliance culture. Now, what are the benefits on enhancing your compliance culture? If you think about it this way, if you're not one that is tick the box mentality and you want to do things the right way, I'm going to discuss the benefits on enhancing it, what it does. So here are some examples. One, creating a sense of urgency among staff. They understand things more. They know what to do. They're in position to meet deadlines, things like that. That's one of the benefits. What about less regulatory issues? If your compliance culture is in a positive light and everybody's performing their job effectively, each person is communicating with one another, there are less opportunities for gaps or issues. So my experience, a positive compliance culture does lead to less regulatory issues. Third, control risk within your organization by creating an effective training plan. Now, creating training is very important. If you want to minimize the risk in your atmosphere, there's a lot of ways you could do it. Training's one, but it also has to do with the compliance culture. You want a consistent approach of what you essentially educate to your users about what to do, what not to do. And I'm not talking tick the box here. I'm talking meaningful training that's directed to certain people. The fourth one, find an approach that's creative, impactful, and memorable. Now, it goes to retention. If you're leading a discussion, you want people to remember what you mentioned. And part of that is knowing your target audience or knowing things that you can create a sense of urgency using. That's an important thing. Now, when you're looking at your compliance culture, it's not just existing staff. Yes, we might have 1,000 people already on board, they're doing their job. Of course, you want to pay attention to them. But what about new hires, contractors, consultants? Some firms have a number of new hires that start on a weekly or monthly basis. So we'll get to that in a second, but contractors and consultants, they usually perform the role of a full-time employee. You can't forget about them because they have access to the same systems, their security clearance is similar. they basically resemble a full-time employee, but they're paid, typically on an hourly or daily wage. So don't forget about them. That's an important thing. Now, with the new hires, now this is the way you can turn the tide. Each new hire coming aboard, say for example, it's 3% of your workforce in the new hire class every single time. You could set the tone with them, right? You could set the tone by providing them information that's really impactful in a certain way. You want to get through to them, create that sense of urgency. Make sure they understand that, we won't tolerate going outside the lines and creating a negative culture, compliance culture. And typically on the new hire, you have an individual who usually sets the tone, somebody from compliance. I was in that position for a while, working as head of training and other roles where I used to greet the new hires every week. It shouldn't stop there. That should only be the first step. The second step, if you're a compliance officer that's aligned to a certain business, the second step is meeting with people in the business that are new hires. Day one, when I used to do the training, it was pretty broad, but your compliance officer that's business aligned should get more granular, things that impact your particular department and so on. I think that's really important. I mentioned before about contractors and consultants, and the reason I want to bring this up again, because it is really important. There are a number of firms that have upwards of 30, 40% of contractors consultant at any given time. That's a big percentage of your workforce. That's why I want to make sure that, when you leave here today, those are individuals, again, that essentially emulate a full-time person. So do not forget about them. Now, when it comes to really understanding where your compliance culture is and where it needs to go, doing a needs analysis. Well, you've heard needs analysis all the times, but we got to call it something. This is an opportunity to explore, research, and figure out what's going on and how we can make those adjustments and change the mood, the atmosphere. So these are steps that I go through when I'm looking at not just a compliance culture, but pretty much anything. But for this session, we're going to focus on compliance culture. So there are 4 steps that I go by. 1, understand the current state. Of course, you have to know where you are, but it's also where have you been the last couple of years? Is it trending in the right way? Is it not trending? And part of this, when you're doing your analysis, is understand the company's goals and objectives, right? You want to make sure that you're in line with what you're going to be doing. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. But when you're analyzing it, you have to think in the back of your head, okay, we're here. Senior management wants to go there. Let's figure out how we can get there. Now, with the current state, there's a lot of analysis to do, right? To figure out where you are. So that brings us to our second step, collecting data. You got to collect data to look at the analysis, right? So this feeds into a lot of different components so you can really gauge where you are. One, I always talk to as many people in an organization as possible, from entry level to the board. I want to get their insights, what they like, what they don't like. Now, particularly with the board or senior management, I want to get their, full transparent idea of where they want to go. And also like what's not enabling them to get there. That's really important because it's great to have an idea, but if you don't execute that idea, it's just an idea. So when I collect the data during those discussions, that's again important. And I want to look at other things compliance related, examinations, external forces too, negative news, all of that. What's stopping us from getting to a positive atmosphere? What's the morale like? Better morale, the better people perform. So you want to collect as much data as possible. And, I use this data for a couple different things. One, I want to know, what kind of training and communications plan am I going to develop to work on? What's going on with for example, the AML program? This is not just training, there's different components that you want to factor in, but you can't get to everyone at once. And sometimes when you're in this position, it's sometimes only you. So you have to keep that in mind. Sometimes you'll have support, but just in my experience, it's been only me. The third thing, you're analyzing the data, right? You want to be able to connect all the dots. From time to time, I usually put it on a whiteboard. I look to see what we have right now, what we don't have, what do people feel we should be at. So I'll put it into different phases and then try to figure out what's missing. Is it tone from the top? Is it what's contributing to an atmosphere that's not conducive to a positive compliance culture? And then, the big part before you actually get going is you got to discuss your findings. Now, you can put together a 50-page report. That's fine. Probably not necessary. But, in the past, I've just done a PowerPoint presentation and I provided that to a number of individuals. And I displayed my findings. And that's where I get additional feedback. All right, listen, this is what you said, but you want to add on to it, or you think differently, or whatever it is. Before you go forward, you want to start, that's going to be your plan of how you get there, your course of attack. Now, to me, I've been in compliance training for a long time, and I'm telling you, this is a big contribution to the overall compliance culture. It does move the needle, but in order to do so, you need others on board. I mentioned before business aligned compliance officers, right? They should help you with your message. Compliance management should be preaching the same message, everybody. So when you're developing your program, you're going to go through your needs analysis, look at all the data, also look at the suggestions from each and every one, figure out, what's a good plan. And then you're going to determine the topics. Your topics, anytime you have a topic that's going to be in your training program, there's got to be a root cause. It's got to be like an audit trail. We're doing this topic because it was a high risk on our risk assessment, or regulators pointed this out, we have to do it, or the business noted that they feel that this is a big risk and people aren't educated enough. You should have a rationale for each topic that's on your plan. Secondly, a balanced approach. E-learning is good. It serves a purpose. And just in my opinion, I think e-learning is great for new hires. It's good for foundational information. But the thing of it is, classroom training is great too, whether it's virtual or not virtual, because people have the opportunity to ask questions. And not only that, others can hear your questions too. So they're learning not just from the instructor, but also from the people in the room. So my point is here, you want to have a nice balanced approach between in-person and e-learning, because they both serve different purposes. Your method of delivery. Remember, everybody learns differently. I remember there's this pyramid about retention and how people learn, and it's interesting. If it's straight lecture, people don't learn, they don't retain, they're going to tune out. If it's interactive, people will stay engaged. Remember, we talk about retention, right? If people are going to retain information, they have to be paying attention. So you have to figure out what's the method of delivery that's the most effective for the particular target audience that you're going to be training. Or remember, this is not just training, it's communications too. Because remember, like, training is one component. Now, you do need refreshers during the course of time. Communication's a great way to do it too, besides doing refresher training. So keep that in mind. Now, with any good training program, you want to make sure that every individual is incorporated. So, what I usually do is meet with the department heads or business unit heads, whatever it is in your organization. But I talk to them about it. And I want to make sure that every team in their department is covered. And I look at previous year's statistics to kind of see who took training and who didn't. And, using Excel is Excel is a great thing. And if you have that ability, use it because you could really see where the weightings are, or, this group took less training than the others. Why? So look at metrics. That's really important, but you want to make sure there's coverage for everybody, especially if you're trying to have the same consistent message. The next one, I think this is big as well. Efficiency. You got to have efficiency in your training program. Um, if you have two topics that are somewhat related, why do it on two different days? You can consolidate it. There's ways to do that. But more importantly, if there's a topic that's relevant to front office and back office, get them in the room together. It's not hard because they learn from each other. It creates better communication flow. There is a workflow from front to back or from middle office. Find out what that is. And if one topic overlaps each other from another department, get them in the room. It will help. But the whole goal is create efficiency because you can't train on everything. You have to bring in color commentators, subject matter experts. You got to bring them into the equation. And you need to preach that training is a good thing. Everybody should get into this. I mean, I've trained people to be trainers in the past, and it's been a hugely beneficial experience. Keep everyone in the loop. Like I said, communication is key. I have periodic meetings. I mean, I'm not talking daily, weekly, monthly. I'm talking quarterly. But if something comes up in between the quarters, I'll definitely meet with them without a doubt, because I want to make sure they're kept in a loop. And I even send an email occasionally if something comes up. Or, if I have a topic that, say, the regulators are focusing on, it has to do with a particular business unit, I'll loop in the compliance officer that's aligned and, meet with the department head. But you want that free flow of communication. Just like you're communicating to them, you want the same approach back in case they need anything. Now, the culture. All right. How can you have an impact on changing the compliance culture? Now, this doesn't sound difficult. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But I just want to preface this. If you want to do it, you're going to do it. You have to be persuasive in your arguments. You got to talk about what could happen if we follow this stream. There's got to be a better approach. Now, to me, like, the influence and persuasion skills are great soft skills to have when you're a member of compliance, because in my field, like compliance training, well, that's one of my fields. Not everybody wants to take compliance training, let's be honest here. So you have to be persuasive in your arguments. So you want to get senior management buy-in. It's got to start there. You want to make sure that you have everybody on board, and you want to respect their decisions, their feedback, and everything. And, you're not going to meet with them every week, 2 weeks, month, probably not, unless it's extremely important, it's top of mind. But typically, just send them an update via email. And if you can attend one of their meetings, working groups, committee meetings, oh, definitely get the FaceTime, get in front of them. That's huge. Secondly, I mentioned this earlier, creating a sense of urgency amongst staff. You have to do it. You got to make sure that people know, well, if I don't do this, this is going to happen. It's happened at a lot of other firms, and we don't want to be like those other firms. So let's get our butts moving and let's do this right. So, and then with other firms, I've gotten in trouble with regulators. They did cut sizable staff. It happens. I'm not saying to scare them out of their seats, but use things that are effective. And that's really important. Third one, training staff. I'm going to harp on this at nauseum. They have to be able to identify red flags. They have to. If they're working in, IT compliance end or non-compliance end, if they see something, they have to point it out. I've seen a lot of it go through the cracks, but you have identifying red flags is so big. But it's not just that. It's like, what do you do when you identify a red flag? Oh, I got to escalate it. Who am I going to escalate it to? All that information should be incorporated. I put this into almost all my trainings because it's so relevant. It doesn't have to be a system. It could be so many other elements that you should consider. Red flags, escalation points. Don't miss out on that. Lastly, embed the values in training communications. Yeah, this is not difficult stuff, people. It really isn't. It requires a little bit more effort. So if you're sending out communications, get creative, drive home the point, have a series of communications, do a video, either record yourself or a senior member and, have a little bit of fun. Make sure compliance isn't known as boring, bland, or dry. And just what I'm saying is basically give it a personality. Now, to me, training compliance officers, that's like, it's funny. I've heard so many different things about it. Non-revenue producing positions typically don't get as much training as revenue producing, or they don't get the perks. It is factual, but it's what I've seen so many times. So if you train compliance officers to be effective in their roles, think of the positiveness. It's a morale thing too, because yeah, it's business related training, but it's also personal development too. So it conquers 2 feet, which is pretty good. So when you look at it, you want them to develop better relationships. You want them to understand the risks within their coverage. This is just typical stuff, right? It doesn't sound too difficult. You want them to serve as an extension of the CCO and training lead. Relationships are key. If you could talk the talk, walk the walk, you're going to have better credibility on who you cover. So don't think that you have to just read a rule verbatim and wish them good luck. Hold their hand. Remember, not everybody understands it like you. These points are important. But if you train compliance officers effectively, and I'm not just saying rules and regs, I mean, anybody could pick that up. It's on how to communicate that information. If you look at a reg, I don't know, look at FATF has multiple guidelines, right, that have to be communicated globally. Listen to how people explain it. Not everybody knows this information. So you want to get everybody on the same page. So I'm a huge component of training compliance officers to be more effective using soft skills. I just think that's a great way to go. So consider it. And I also have other articles on this topic that you could always reach out and discuss. What to know. This is all about the target audience. So how do you talk to somebody you don't really know? Or how do you line up a discussion and get through to them if you don't know them at all? There's so many different ways you can know somebody. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But it's really important because you want to align to them. If you're in a discussion, say, I'm going to make this up, fixed income department head, right? Find out about that person. There's so many ways you can look him up or her up, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the external social media platforms, but you also have the intranet. Intranet's a good thing. Take advantage of it. You get to learn a lot about the person. You put that all together and you're pretty knowledgeable going in, but you could also do more. You could also find out or talk to people on the team, in the department, get a sense of things. All this stuff helps. Once you know who you're going to talk to, do the due diligence. It's kind of like playing a professional sport, say baseball, right? You bat 300, you can get into the Hall of Fame. If you use the same approach all the time, yeah, you might hit it 30% of the time, but why not put a little bit extra effort and do a little bit better? So, just to get narrow on this, study the roles and responsibilities, learn what people do in that department, learn what the individual does. Again, you have sources of information, right? You know, that's important. Typically in an organization, I would say a little larger, it's like each business unit has its own personality. The company of the whole has one, but if you're looking at like asset management, investment banking, trading, they all have different personalities. Some are type A, some type B, and all of that. So you want to get to know the personality type. Now, if you're meeting with an individual, it helps to know their personality type a lot. What type of person are they? Are they head of accounting? Are they head of a front office role? You know, Even if you walk past them, you listen to them in conversation, you kind of get a different sense on how people are looking at that individual, how they're talking, who's dominating the session. That's a big important one too. The generation thing is like a plus. If you could figure out a generation one way or the other, it helps. Like millennials are different than baby boomers, Gen X, so on and so forth. It adds into your discussion. To me, that's like a bonus. And anything that can help, take advantage of it. And you also want to know like full-time versus temp staff, consulting contractors, because that's going to have something to do with your approach, where people are located. In these days, we're not all located in the same office. We're spread around, especially in this remote environment, and it could last a lot longer. So this is information to know with your target audience. And this is the big one. It's not just about training, it's everything. Your communications. So when you study the target audience, like I described, and you know about them, you can figure out how they learn best. Relate the training by understanding what they do. So if you're training like a group of investment bankers, you want to find case studies, exercises that make sense that they can get involved with. And you got to remember, investment bankers, most of them are outgoing type A's. So they like to talk. That's a generalization, but I hope you get my point. The real life scenarios, that is really important. You don't want to make stuff up. You could, but it doesn't have the same impact. If you come up with a case study based on a real life situation that occurred that some people aren't familiar with, they're gonna be interested. Ask them, what do you think? What would you do differently? There's a lot of questions to feed the discussion. Yeah, you do need a comfortable environment. If it's remote, do what you can. If it's in person, there's a lot you could do with the logistics to really make it beneficial. Last point, soft skills. I think soft skills training is so necessary in this day and age. When you look at effective leaders, look at their makeup. Typically I see an individual with a high EQ, emotional intelligence, good presentation skills, good presence. Those are things that people should strive to be better at. And, it's just taking the effort because you want to do an effective job. So my thing is, why can't compliance training be interesting and impactful? Oh yeah, it definitely can. You think about it, look at all the cases out there around the world. That's the positive thing about compliance training. You could always find something, whether it's in your jurisdiction or an entirely new one. It doesn't matter. You'll find things. And just on that note, again, don't use the same case study that everybody uses. You'll lose everybody and they won't care that much. So whatever you use, make sure that it's new, it's original, or put a twist on it. That's really important because if you get that retention level up, people leave there. Listen, they're not going to retain 100% of the knowledge, impossible. But if you can get them to retain a good portion and they remember it and they're able to use it on the job, don't you think the risk in the atmosphere would probably go down? Think of it, red flags. If you're teaching somebody in AML who does transaction monitoring, right? And you tell them what to look for, don't you think that they're going to spot more things than they did before? I think so. Measuring the effectiveness of anything you do is important. And I'm going to caveat this if you care. If you don't care, then obviously you're not going to measure anything. But we're talking in the world of caring in this presentation. That's the important thing. So you need to measure it. How did people learn? What do they retain? Are they using it? All of that. That stuff should be that's really important to make sure, because if you want the risk to go down in your atmosphere and have a better compliance culture, then you're not doing this, then you're just ticking a box. What use is that? To me, it has no use. So first point, what worked? Okay, something's got to work, right? Maybe say 40, 50% worked well. 10% worked okay. The rest of it probably needs some tweaking. Ask for feedback, ask for, evaluation forms, whatever you can do to get that information. Lessons learned. If you're having an interactive session, you're going to hear a lot of feedback. Well, at least hopefully, if you stimulate it, and you're going to learn what you could do bigger and better. It's not difficult. It's like I said, the caring element. The next one, follow up on training communication. Like, what are the next steps? When you put this all pen to paper and you do your research of the effectiveness of what you delivered, that should not be it. I measured it, great, good, let's move on. No, there should be a step 2 to that training. Either a refresher training in a couple of months down the road, or communications. It doesn't have to be so formal. It could be a reminder, but think of it as a campaign. Every element's a campaign, and that's the way you should look at it. Now, as far as evaluating the effectiveness, there's a couple different ways. One is behavior. See if there's a difference after they attended the training. One, well, we talked about understanding like an individual's role, right? I use that example in AML transaction monitoring. If the person is more intelligent now to identify red flags, well, the exception reporting should be a lot less. So you want to talk to managers, department heads, get their reaction, talk to the individuals that attended, look at that metrics. Not so bad. The next one, learning. Test their knowledge. You can't do this all the time. It's harder with virtual, but it could be done easily. But in person, yeah, do a 10-question assessment or do it online through your learning management system. See how they performed. And, typical is 80%. If they're retaining the information, they should pass with flying colors. And you might want to mention that during the training. Sometimes you have consequence management guidelines where if you do fail training or don't take training, there is consequences. If your organization has something like that, you might want to mention it. The last one's reaction. That's the happy sheets. The happy sheets, remember, if it's compliance training, not everyone's going to be happy no matter what. So let's just be realistic here. So, what are the participants' view? Ask the questions, but the realistic responses you probably get is about the speaker, the material, the time frame, things like that, more logistics related. But each one, not saying you have to use all 3, but they serve a purpose. Now, I want to really thank you, everybody, for attending today, and I hope you learned a lot. Creating a positive compliance culture, to me, it just has so many benefits, and I think you should explore it, especially if, morale is low, you're having regulatory issues, things like that. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for attending, and I wish everybody the best.